Hello, welcome back to another pen talk. Thanks for tuning in. This talk is going to be about vintage, but not vintage as you may traditionally think about it, but vintage as they referred to some of the older Chinese pens, which are I think mostly from the 1990s. So these are two recent acquisitions that I got. This one has that cellophane sleeve that we saw on another Hero. And this also has some interesting colorations to it. There's this nice little tag on it with the Hero logo. A little bit of wear there. Yeah, that just comes off very easily. As you can see, the clip is fairly sturdy. It's a very highly modified and stylized arrow clip, but functional. Very stiff. You just have your plain finial at the top, cap band, place to post the pen, another metal section here. The pen is medium size weight, but what's nice is this striped material, which could be rolled celluloid. You never know. We had that discussion a little bit earlier about another pen that they called celluloid, and I did more research, and celluloid is made in sheets. You can a lot of times use them to make guitar picks out of, and I'm certain that those sheets can be rolled to make a cylinder that could be used as a pen. Those lines are certainly not straight, but it's just an interesting color scheme and something that I like to have seen. This is a 261. The cap has the classic Hero on it, the model 261. I mean, this pen has probably sat around for 20 or more years, so I think that shows up in some of the corrosion that occurs some of these plated parts. It's a standard pull-off cap, and we have a kind of a captured nib. I wouldn't call it a hooded or semi-hooded, but I think this is kind of typical of pens of this era from Japan. There's heavily carved out lines in the section, which is fairly narrow. The pen fits fine in the hand, and as we mentioned, it's designed for posting on that, and it becomes very long and I think unwieldy because it's very back weighted with that cap on it. But this is just an interesting pen. Here's the eBay auction for that. And then in my looking at other type of pens referred to as vintage, I came across this pen. It has a matte finish on it, which is nice. I figured I could call this my my baby Visconti Homo sapiens. That's really pushing it, but hey. This cap also just pulls off, and we have a more traditional section, a more traditional nib there. I didn't show it on the other one, but unscrew and we have your parametric converter. And like I talked about on the 336, this converter easily comes off, and as you can see, it's a standard international cartridge design there at the end, so you can easily replace this with another converter if that's what you would like to do. So as we take a look at this pen, we'll also see an parametric converter. And this one, that cap band is, that band there in the section is loose, that metal band. This one doesn't come off. So you don't really know until you get the pen as to whether that's going to be the case or not. So this one, you're stuck with that parametric converter. Hopefully you can learn to like it. So one of the things I mentioned before that's a side benefit of doing video reviews is other pen lovers give you things that they've collected that they thought might be of interest to you. So one of my fellow pen enthusiasts, while traveling overseas, came across these interesting inks from Hero. We have super ink, which I think is an interesting way of describing an ink. Very nicely done packaging. Looks like it is geared towards international sales. A lot of English there. So brilliant color, non-corrosion, smooth writing, recording documents. So it's an interesting description. This I think is probably not as expensive or higher end ink. And this looks like it's primarily designed particularly for the Chinese market, and it's advanced account ink, which is an interesting description. So the other thing that's nice about these inks is, you know, they come well packaged, and this is an interesting bottle. Reminiscent of Parker ink. We'll show you that Parker bottle when I get it out of the closet. And the 252, similar type of packaging, nice little styrofoam, but this one's a more traditional small bottle of ink. Advanced account ink, so that's interesting. And this is kind of also reminiscent of vintage ink bottles, from ink bottles of vintage variety from the 20s and 30s. So I mentioned that bottle reminds me of a bottle, and those of us who've been around for a while or have delved into inks, this is a very popular ink at the time. I bought a number of bottles of it. And as you can see, it is similar. Not exact, but similar. I might be able to reconstitute that with a little bit of distilled water in it, but this ink is somewhat aggressive, so we don't think that's going to be the case. This is as close of a vintage bottle I could find. This is also Quink Parker blue ink. It's a similar design, diamond-shaped bottle. Not exact, but close. So I think Parker had a big influence on a lot of the Chinese pen manufacturers, and they mimic some of their ink items in addition to some of their pen designs. So I think chromatography does have its place, especially in looking at these types of inks. So if this is your standard chromatography, I mean, that's a pretty consistent color. It's in the black family, but what's really interesting is when you let it dry, I mean, that is definitely permanent ink. There's nothing, no movement there, and you still have that permanent line that you wrote initially. Looking at the 252, you notice there's a lot more blue, and so that's kind of more of a blue-black, and if you let it dry, it does have a decent amount of permanence on the black color, but the blue will spread. So that's, I think, interesting. So here's the two color cards for the inks, and this is definitely in the blue-black family. And this is definitely a pigmented black ink. I mean, that is about as pitch black as you can get. And just as a comparison, here's Noodler's Eel Black, and as you can see, definitely not as intense. And I think you can get a little bit of sheen off of that pigmented black, which might be from the pigment. Here's just a comparison, so you can put these two vintage heroes into how they compare to a Pilot 78G or a Lamy All-Star. The All-Star is a big pen. I think the 78G is what I've been calling medium small, and the two Chinese pens fall into a little bit smaller than the 78G, at least in girth. Length is about the same. Here we are looking at the business end, and again the length is similar for the first three pens, the two heroes and the 78G. Section's a little bit bigger on the 78G, and of course the Lamy Safari is an animal unto itself. So a close-up of the business end. So, you know, the sections are different on all these three pens. This is the narrowest section, and it has those grooves in the section. This is a little bit more standard size, but obviously thinner than a 78G, and the Lamy Safari has that classic Lamy triangular shaped section. The 216 is a good size pen. Here's the weights. When I give the weights, I give the pen weight, which is the pen and cap together, barrel and cap together, and then I just give the cap weight. And hopefully that gives you an idea of how much the cap weighs relative to the barrel and what posting would do to affect the balance. So this pen uncaps easily, fits well in the hand. It actually feels light even though it's a little bit heavier than some pens. That little metal piece at the end of the barrel lets it post securely, and even though that cap's a little heavy, it doesn't really change the weight much. I would still probably write with this unposted, but for those who want to post, it does post and post securely. This is a fine nib. It doesn't have any flex to it. If you put a lot of pressure on it, you can spring it, which I did do once. It pops back pretty easily, but not something you want to do. So not a pen you want to even try to flex with. But it's a nice fine line. And that's a pretty wet line. And that is definitely the bluer inks, the account ink. So all in all, this is okay writer. I mean, nothing to run home about or shout to the rooftops, but you know, if you like the way the pen looks and you like smaller pens, which have thin sections and those grooves you do feel, and you know, you can hold it pretty close to the nib, it'll work fine. There is a step up here, but you really don't feel it much. This is the one with the parametric filler, which is not replaceable. Another little look at that, which I'm going to call celluloid wrapping. That's around the barrel and cap. So overall, on a scale of 1 to 10, I call this pen a 5. I just started doing that and may never do it again, but I just wanted to put it in perspective. So of the two pens, much to my surprise, this one had an interesting writing experience. The cap is very secure. It takes a fair amount of effort to uncap it. And a lot of times you'll notice when there's bands like this, one band is on the cap and one is on the barrel, but in this case they're both on the barrel. And I just wanted to show that you can replace the parametric filler. This came with a standard, this is just a Jinhao converter I took out of a 992. It fit in fine, filled fine. So I know probably most parametric fillers are not removable, but this one is. You know, this fits fine in a hand, just like the 216 did. It's even lighter. We'll give you those weights. But one of the things that I find interesting about this pen, and I have to say a little bit disappointed, is it looks like it should post, but it doesn't. It's loose, comes off easily. I mean, you can post if you want to, but it doesn't feel secure. It doesn't change the weight at all. So, like the 216, you can post it or not post it, that's your choice. You may have saw it was a little bit of a hard start. Both of these pens were a little bit of a hard start after a few days. You know, but I never had any skipping or issues. Once it starts writing, it writes pretty consistently. And these hero inks might dry out, might have a tendency to dry out more than other inks, but just be aware of the fact that, you know, probably the way these are designed, there's probably a fair amount of airflow. It just doesn't seal well. You know, it's a metal, no real cap liner. It doesn't look like in there, but whatever it is, that's one of the downsides to these pens. But this is a 1mm, and that's the other thing, is it's sensitive, more sensitive to angle than the nib in the 216 was. And that's probably why I'm getting those hard starts. And also writing over the camera, it's hard to really position the nib properly, put the right pressure on it, etc. But I like this nib. I mean, that's a lot of ink. And I like the fact that it's a little bit of a stub. Some may call it a medium, but that lays down a ton of ink. And this is black ink. Now, my first pigmented black ink I've ever used, I have a pigmented sepia, but it didn't have any of the characteristics like this ink did. I gave the 216 5. So if I was going to put this in perspective, I would call it a 7.5. And that's basically because of the nib. I like the way it feels and looks better than the 216, and I certainly do like the way it lays down ink. So hopefully you've enjoyed this little look at a couple heroes, which are called vintage, which probably means they're from the 90s or early 2000s. Some of my viewers are quite familiar with the Hero line and know its history, so please let me know if there's anything I said that was incorrect, or if we can add more information to these two models. And let me know if you like my new intro. So thank you for watching. May you have many excellent pen, ink, paper experiences. You can hear that nib, but you don't feel it. So until we get together again, bye for now.